So hello and welcome to the continued coverage of our walkthrough series, and in this episode we are looking at 9618 variant 41 of October-November rather 2023. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the Java implementation for question 1 of this paper. Alright, so we are given an iterative function called iterative vowels. So essentially it's going to take a string as a parameter and count the number of lowercase vowels in this string. So we have the pseudocode implementation of that particular function. Then of course they're just describing how the mid function works in pseudocode and throwing a little example there. Then we also have the length function, again showing us how it works. These functions, if you go back to your paper 2, they're usually given, they are usually included on the insert that you take into paper 2. So you should know how these functions work even without them giving you an example here. But nonetheless, of course, they have given you an example so that you can refresh your mind as to how they work. So here we have the first part, a item 1, where we need to write program code for the function iterative vowels. Again, we are not starting from scratch because we are already given this pseudocode that we are working with. So let's actually go ahead and look at how I went about it in my solution here. So coming to iterative vowels, this is my function spanning from line 7 up to line 23. So you can see that the function header, essentially we are going to return an integer. So if we switch back to the question paper, you see that our function should return an integer, right? And we are taking one argument or one parameter of type string called value. So if you come here, you see that my function header is actually matching what we have in the pseudocode there. So there's really not much difference there, only except that for the syntax now I'm conforming to the Java syntax because this is a Java solution. Then the next thing that we need to do is we need to declare variables for length, total length, and first character. And we are essentially going to set these values like the total. We are supposed to initialize it to 0. Then the length of the string is going to be the length of the string, right? That is passed as an argument right here. So you see that we're actually taking that value there and checking its length and storing it as the length of the string. Then for my implementation, I go on to use a loop. So essentially I'm just going to initialize a for loop that's going to start at index position 0, then it's going to run for as long as it is less than the length of the string. Then I'm implementing the variable x by 1, or rather the index by 1 every time. So we are checking to see on line 12 we are setting the first character to the value. We are taking the string that was passed as an argument, then we are taking the character at index 0 and storing it as the first character as it. So this is where they have the first character declaration right there. So you see that I didn't declare it right there on top there, but I actually just did it in here. Of course, I would have done the same thing, but I just did declare initialize it locally inside of this for loop as it were. Then the next thing that we need to do is we need to check to see if the first character matches any of the vowels. So that is A, E, I, O, U. So I'm using the first character checking to see if it is equal to A or if it is equal to E. So remember the double pipe symbol, that's how you write an O in Java. So we double pipe symbol, checking all those conditions. Then if that's the case, we are simply going to increment total by 1. Then we are also going to slice the string and move on to check to see the remaining characters as it were. So let's say if we had the word value, for instance, we would slice and check to see if vowel is sorry, the letter V is a vowel. Then if it's not a vowel, then we're simply not going to increment total. Then we move on to A. So that's essentially what we're doing. So we're just slicing the string and moving on to the next. So this is going to iterate for as long as the length of the string. So in this case, let's say if value was the string that we were given, it would actually be a length of 5. So it's going to run for a length of less than 5. But remember, we're setting it index position 0, so it's going to run all the way to index position 4, which is where we have the letter E, for instance. If say the value for the variable or the value inside of the value variable, that was value. Hope that makes sense. Then essentially we're just going to return total. So that's what we're doing here. So for this implementation, you will get 5 marks. So you go ahead and copy this code and paste it inside of the evidence document. Then moving on to the next aspect, we have item number 2, I believe. So we have to write program code to call the function iterative vowels with the parameter house from the main program. Then we are also to output the return value. Okay, so let's switch back to the code, and you see my main method is down here. So I'm initializing a variable called, I'm declaring a variable called iterative count, which is essentially going to hold the count of my vowels, rather the count that is being returned by iterative vowels, because remember iterative vowels is going to return a value called total. So I'm taking that total that iterative vowels returns and storing it inside of this iterative count as it will. Then of course we are passing house as an argument to the iterative vowels function. Then we simply output how many vowels we encountered inside of the given string. Then we need to take a screenshot of the output. So let me just go ahead and click on run. Hopefully I don't get a class not found error, of which I'm gonna get it because well, let me not tell you why I'm getting it. Let me just fix the solution right here. So the solution is quite easy. I just need to compile the program as it will. So my folder that I'm working with is November. So let me just copy this right here. That's the name of the folder that I want. Then my file is this one. So I'm just going to put it here, then say .java. Then I'm going to hit enter. Then that should compile and run my program. So iterative count for house is 3. So you actually see that we have 1, 2, 3 vowels going in there. Then this one is for later on. So we are just focusing on this particular aspect right here. So that's of course, you'd go ahead and take a screenshot of this, and paste it inside of the evidence document as it will. Then moving on to the next part, which is part B, item 1. So we are to write the iterative vowels function, but this time recursively with an identifier of recursive vowels. So we need to write program code for a function called recursive vowels. Now you can always check out my other videos on the channel. I have a video in which I cover recursion in more detail, how you can go about writing recursive functions. But essentially, let me just walk you through the way you would want to go about it in this instance. So with recursion, you need to remember that you are just having a function that calls itself until it solves a particular problem, is it? So you need 2 things for a recursive function. The first thing is to have the base case. So when would you want to return, or when would you like to exit out of the particular recursive function? And then that's what we call the base case. Then we also have something, maybe let's say we can call it a test case. I don't know, for lack of a better word. But basically, this is sort of like a technique that's going to allow you to work towards the base case as it were. Also, you can think of it as sort of like a method, how you are going to walk towards the exit. As it were, because remember the base case is sort of like the exit. Then you need a way or a map that's going to guide you towards the base case, so that eventually you are going to exit out of your recursive function. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you are going to have a recursive function that doesn't terminate as it were. So for this particular implementation, we need to know that since we are taking a string called value, we are simply going to return 0 if the length of the string is equal to 0. Is it? So this right here is actually going to be what? Our base case as it were. So we are simply going to return 0 if the length of the string is 0. So this might actually work in the instant. Let's say if someone were to pass an empty string, is it? We are not going to test for any vowels because there's nothing to test for. So we just exit out of the recursive function as it were. Then on line 31, that's where we are now slicing the first character from the value, from the string called value, and placing it inside of this first character, is it? Then we are initializing our count to 0. So here now we are going to have sort of like a way with which we can exit out of our recursive function, right? So we are testing to see if the first character is A, E, I, O, or U, is it? Then we are going to set the count to 1, right? Then essentially what we are going to do now is we are going to return the count of 1. So let's say count was 1. Let's say maybe we had encountered a vowel, right? So the count would be what? Would be 1, is it? If it matches any one of these vowels, it's going to be 1. So we're going to take 1 plus recursive vowels. Now notice that we are now calling the same function, but this time around we are now passing the sliced string starting at the next index position, which is what? Which is now 1. So essentially we've moved from the first character to the next character, is it? And we are calling the same function. So when you call the same function recursively, it's actually just going to perform the same things that are inside of the body of this function, is it? So it's as good as we are now at index position 2, but we are just performing the same things, is it? And then returning count. So count, you see that is going to accrue as we continue with what? With calling the recursive vowels function right there. So this is actually going to continue for however long the string that you have passed as an argument here is, until we actually return a count value that is, let's say for the case of house, it was going to be 3. So that's how that works. So again, when you are writing recursive functions, you need a base case, right, which is basically sort of like an exit. Then you need a way to walk towards that exit, which is basically how you're going to narrow down the recursive function so that it slides towards the base case as it will eventually to terminate. Then of course you're just returning the count in the end. So of course for this implementation, you would copy the code and paste it inside of the evidence document. Moving on to part B, item 2, we need to write program code to call the function recursive vowels with the parameter emerging from the main program. And then of course we have to take the screenshot of that. So let's just switch to the code here. So B item 2, we are now calling recursive vowels, passing it and margin as an argument. Then we are storing the count that we are going to be returned by recursive vowels inside of this recursive count variable. Then on line 53, we are just outputting how many vowels are inside of that particular string that was passed. Then of course, let's go ahead and I'm just going to run the code one more time, but actually we had seen it earlier on, so maybe let me just run it here one more time. And you actually see that we get the same thing, is it? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 vowels inside of what? Of the word imagine. So I think that was the last bit of it. Let's see, do we have any more questions? No, we don't. So that's the solution for number 1 in Java. Hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.